In this lesson, we take a look at how to set V-Ray as your render engine and how it integrates with 3ds Max's user interface. Basically, where you can find different V-Ray tools and options in 3ds Max. One of the first things to integrate V-Ray with 3ds Max is to go to your Customize menu and click on Custom UI and Default Switcher, and select max.vray as your default option and click on the set button down here. Now you might need to restart your Max session to make sure the changes are applied to the UI and default settings. I've already done that. By doing so, now V-Ray is fully integrated with 3ds Max UI. You don't have to do it, but if you do it this way, V-Ray is going to be a lot more useful. Now, for example, whenever you start 3ds Max, V-Ray is set as your render engine. If I open up my, for example, material editor in the compact mode, all the slots are occupied with V-Ray materials and so on. Now, V-Ray actually includes two renders, V-Ray and V-Ray RT. If you go to your render setup window by pressing F10, in the render dropdown, you notice you have two V-Ray render, V-Ray EDU and V-Ray RT. EDU stands for educational. That's because I'm using the academic version of V-Ray. If you are using the commercial version, you would see V-Ray ADV or ADV, which stands for V-Ray Advanced. This is basically the main V-Ray renderer, the one which supports all the features of V-Ray, and you would use it for rendering your final image. On the other hand, you have V-Ray RT or V-Ray Real Time. This is an interactive preview renderer. For example, if you are working on your lighting or shading, whatever changes you make, you can see the results in real time, which is an extraordinary helpful feature and makes the process quite a lot faster. But it doesn't support all the V-Ray features. We will be discussing V-Ray RT in depth in one of our upcoming lessons. The normal workflow is to use V-Ray Advanced or Educational as your production renderer, then switch your target to active shade mode and set V-Ray RT as your active shade mode. You can use V-Ray RT in both production and active shade mode, but V-Ray Advanced or Educational can only be used as production renderer. Let's take a look at the UI and see where you can find different V-Ray tools and options. After you set V-Ray as your render engine in the render setup window, you see all of these new specific V-Ray tabs. Here is where you control the quality of your render and image sampling. You control the global illumination, alternate different V-Ray settings, and set up your render elements to work with them in an external compositing app like Nuke or After Effects. The next major UI element is V-Ray Toolbar. I have it docked on the left side of my interface. You can simply undock it by clicking and dragging it and dock it wherever you want. This toolbar includes the most used V-Ray tools and options. So basically tons of hidden V-Ray tools and options in the menus or panels are simply exposed here, and you can use them without having to go through different menus, which is very, very useful. I'll be discussing this toolbar in another video. Right now, just let me go briefly and introduce some of the buttons here. Up here we have render current frame in the production mode. If you click and hold, also you can see we have the render current frame in the active shade mode. Okay. Next we have last VFB, which is going to show you the virtual frame buffer window and your last render. I will be discussing this window in one of our future lessons. Next we have V-Ray render settings, and then we have V-Ray quick settings window, which allows you to quickly and easily adjust your render setting without having to deal with the complex interface of the render setup window. Next we have V-Ray light lister, which lets you to see and adjust all the lights that you have in your scene. We have the ability to create different types of cameras down here. We have the ability to create different V-Ray lights. Then you have V-Ray proxy, V-Ray metaball, V-Ray plane, V-Ray displacement modifier, V-Ray fair, V-Ray hair farm, and or matrix modifiers. You can create V-Ray material and V-Ray VR matte material. You can register the V-Ray menus, and also by clicking on the V-Ray help button, you can go to the V-Ray official documentation and help. If you take a look at the menus, you will find some V-Ray related options and items. In the tools menu, we have the V-Ray light lister and V-Ray VR matte converter. In the create menu, you can create different V-Ray objects and V-Ray lights and different V-Ray cameras. In the modifier menu, you have access to different V-Ray modifiers. And in the rendering menu, you got the Make V-Ray RT Animation preview. If for whatever reason you can't see these V-Ray specific menu items, please make sure to click on the V-Ray menu registration button in your V-Ray toolbar. Also in your commands panel, in the create panel, you can create different V-Ray objects and V-Ray lights and V-Ray cameras. In the modify panel, you have access to different V-Ray modifiers and so on. Another major V-Ray component is going to be your V-Ray materials and maps. So if I press M to open up the material editor and make sure I am in the slate material editor, on the left side you can see we have different V-Ray materials, and down here we have V-Ray maps. I can right click here, create maybe a V-Ray material, double click on its name and start editing it. So in this lesson we talked about how to set V-Ray as your render engine and what is the difference between V-Ray and V-Ray RT. We'll learn about user interface and how V-Ray integrates with 3ds Max. See you in the next lesson.